Today, we're going to talk about moral reasoning. To begin, let's pick up on prescriptive judgments about right and wrong. Remember, we established that at the basis of moral thinking, we have foundational values. These are the core of what we believe to be good. Those foundational values are the most important intrinsic values, meaning values that are good for their own sake. From those intrinsic values, we derive instrumental values that help us achieve them. When we make statements about these values, we are making normative claims, arguments about how the world should be. From those normative claims, we derive prescriptive claims, arguments about how we should act in the world. Prescriptive claims do kind of what they sound like. They offer a prescription for right action based on the diagnoses of normative claims. If we want the world to look a certain way, normative claims, then we should act like this, prescriptive claims. The nature of these moral claims is that they are also truth claims. They make an argument about the nature of reality. That makes them testable. Often we test them out with rationality. This is a test for what we call validity and soundness. Let's imagine we have two friends, Ahmed and Shreya. Last year, when the school was going to do an experiment on pigs, they both protested. This year, the school has decided to experiment on clams instead. If we ask them to make a valid moral argument about what they should do, they might say, A. Ahmed and Shreya believe they should protest against animal testing. B. The class is supposed to do experiments on clams. C. Ahmed and Shreya should protest the experiments. This is valid or well-formed. If A and B are true, then C is true. What we have here is a valid recipe for moral judgment. Let's break down A for a second to see how it's built of everything we've discussed so far. Shreya and Ahmed have a normative foundational value, harm is bad. They also seem to have another normative value, resisting injustice is good. So they have two prescriptive claims. 1, do not test on animals, and 2, resist when others test on animals. Number 2 is a descriptive claim. There will be testing on animals, and so they have a valid judgment for number 3. They should protest. But, while it is valid, it may not be sound. A sound argument is a valid argument in which all the premises are true. While this definition is useful, most of the time this last part, the premises are true, is more difficult to prove than simply citing a statistic from PubMed. This is what we call contingency, the gray areas. Let's start by assuming that both Shreya and Ahmed are what we call universalists. They believe that moral claims should be universalizable, or hold for all people in all situations. This does not necessarily mean that they think all principles should hold for all people in all situations, though they might. Rather, they might believe that if a value applies to one element of a particular class, such as people or animals, then it applies to everything in that class. But even this doesn't mean they'll agree on the nature or contents of those classes. Shreya believes that all animals have a right to be free from testing because they feel pain. So their foundational value is, pain is bad for anything that feels it. In that case, our syllogism is both valid and sound for Shreya. But perhaps Ahmed protested experimenting on pigs because they believe that intelligent life has a right to be free from testing, and Ahmed doesn't believe that clams are intelligent. In that case, while the syllogism is valid, it may actually be unsound for Ahmed. What is at stake here are foundational principles. Like foundational values, don't get those mixed up, foundational principles are the source for other derived principles. Shreya's foundational principle is, do not harm anything that can feel harm. Ahmed's foundational principle is, do not harm intelligent beings. So their derived principles and prescriptive claims differ. Protest all testing versus protest all testing on intelligent creatures. Now they're ready for the real plant-based meat and potatoes of philosophy, questions about the moral truth claims of values. I like to think about this through the metaphor of tools, since that's the only time I'm any good with them. A good hammer is valid or well-formed. So is a good saw. But they accomplish very different things, and they're not always the right tool for the moral job. Disagreements over soundness are almost never about facts. It's unlikely Shreya can convince Ahmed that clams are intelligent with a fact about how many neurons they have. Instead, they might ask Ahmed to consider contingencies around their foundational value to see if it's really what they want. That's a good hammer, Shreya might say, But if intelligence is really your foundational value, what about babies? What about people with dementia? What about all the historical crimes against groups of people that an oppressive group deemed less intelligent? Or, Ahmed might suggest they both need to back up to the normative claim on which they agree, harm is bad, to then move forward toward a derived principle that accounts for their differences. Or perhaps Ahmed is what we call a particularist. They believe that moral reflection can entail more than just logic, and that considerations about the people and relationships involved might produce different results. In this case, they might say that clams are not necessarily as sensitive or intelligent as pigs, and that the work of the class might affect people and relationships that matter more to him than clams. So, given that consideration, they choose not to protest. In any of these cases, they'll need to think about how the universal principles they use can speak to the considerations the other person thinks matter, or to ask how the other person's principles can help them to think about those considerations. And, in the end, they may disagree. That's the beauty of moral philosophy. They both might be valid, and they both might be perfectly convinced that their claims have proper truth value, and think that their tools are the right tools for the job. It's up to them to reflect on their values, help each other think through one another's values, and help us think along with them.